Since the early 20th century, the myth concerning the existence of gremlins has persisted. They are considered mischievous creatures who secretly destroy things and cause accidents to happen. The Royal Air Force used gremlins as the universal explanation as to why they had so many odd, unexplainable mechanical failures with their aircraft during World War I and then World War II. In 1943, author Roald Dahl popularized these conspiracy theories with his book, The Gremlins, based on his own personal experiences during the war. But it wasn't until 1984 and the events that decimated the small town of Kingston Falls would the world finally bear witness to the actual chaos and violence a gremlin infestation could wreak in such a short period of time. And this is where we find ourselves, ready to review the Christmas holiday classic from producer Steven Spielberg, director Joe Dante, and writer Chris Columbus, starring Zach Galligan, Phoebe Cates, yes, that Phoebe Cates, along with Corey Feldman and Mushroom the Dog. This is the highest grossing film in history to never actually reach number 1 at the box office. Gremlins. Why did it not reach number 1? Because 1984 was one of the greatest years for movies ever. The top 10 grossing films in order that year were Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, The Karate Kid, Police Academy, Footloose, Romancing the Stone, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, and Splash. Shall I go on? Gremlins was released the same day as Ghostbusters, which only beat it by a mere $1 million. As well, it competed with the Temple of Doom, the Karate Kid, and Star Trek during those same weeks. On a budget of $11 million, it raked in $148 million. That would be almost $500 million today. So yeah, this is another Generation X holiday masterpiece. But it didn't start out that way. In fact, the film is not without controversy. It was considered, at least the original script and initial action scenes were considered, too graphic and too gory. But even before principal photography started, Gremlins was causing a real-life mess at the studios. Just like George Lucas, who wanted to use a real-life monkey in a mask to play Yoda on screen in The Empire Strikes Back, his good friend Steven Spielberg suggested using spider monkeys in costume to portray the hundreds of gremlins that would be needed to tell this story. Well, they tried, a spider monkey was brought in, they put a mask on its head, and to no one with a brain's surprise, the monkey panicked and destroyed the office as well as uncontrollably shit all over because it was afraid. So, easy decision, no monkeys, we go to the special effects department and build animatronics, which cost between $30,000 and $40,000 each at the time, which made Warner Brothers hire armed guards to check everyone's car, including the trunk, every day to make sure no one stole a gremlin. But the studio problems didn't stop there. The script was a major concern. This is supposed to be a very horrific holiday film, including the killing of a family dog, the decapitation of the mother and having her head roll down the stairs, the gremlins attacking a McDonald's restaurant, but instead of eating the food, they would eat the people inside. And over again, each scene was softened to achieve that PG rating. It is said that this film, along with the Temple of Doom, were major inspirations for the creation of the PG-13 classification. And if you read the novelization of Gremlins, you'll see a lot of this over-the-top violence is still present, which we'll cover some of it as we go through the film. But before we begin, we'd appreciate it if you like, subscribe, share, and comment. It really helps out the channel each and every week. Alright, let's get into it. We open with the dark, seedy alleyways of Chinatown. Our narrator is Rand Peltzer, a small-time inventor who's shopping for a gift for his son. A young Chinese boy brings him to his grandfather's shop underneath the street level. The two red Cantonese characters that we see on the wall translate the store's name to Gods and Monsters. Once inside, Rand is surrounded by antiques that range from chess sets with gargoyles to stuffed birds to wind chimes, all illuminated with candlelight. The owner of the store, the young boy's grandfather, sits quietly smoking a pipe. Rand, never one to miss an opportunity to try and sell some of his inventions, tries to hawk a few bathroom buddies, a Swiss Army knife version of a bathroom travel kit. It doesn't work. However, while Rand is speaking, a high-pitched voice is singing in the background, distracting him. Rand finally lets his curiosity get the best of him and asks what is making that sound. The young boy then introduces him to their mogwai, which translates to demon, devil, or gremlin, and Rand offers $200 for the creature. The old man states that the mogwai is not for sale, to which the young boy tells Rand to meet him outside. Against his grandfather's wishes, the young boy sells the mogwai to Rand and he heads home for Christmas. We are then transported to the United States in the voice of rocking Ricky Rialto, the voice of Kingston Falls, USA, greeting us over the radio. And by the way, yes, the town does look familiar if you've also seen Back to the Future. It's the same studio backlot. The opening credits and opening shot of Kingston Falls is accompanied by the holiday classic song, Christmas. The picturesque setting is perfectly portrayed for holiday joy and comfort, but as we pan in and meet the inhabitants of Kingston Falls, we soon learn that everyone is just a little bit off. We meet the sheriff who tries to get a free Christmas tree for the station, and Pete, played by Corey Feldman, dressed as a tree to drum up business. We next meet Billy Peltzer and his dog Barney. Billy's VW bug is frozen over and won't start. He's late for work at the bank, a bank that apparently lets you bring your pets to work. Mr. Futterman, Billy's next door neighbor, comes out to help but mostly complains about foreign-made products. Remember, this was the 1980s when American manufacturing was going into the toilet in favor of Japanese imports. Every street had a Mr. Futterman. As Billy walks through the town square, the theater marquee advertises a double feature, A Boy's Life and Watch the Skies, which at the time were the working titles of Spielberg's next two films, E.T. and Close Encounters. Billy is late, but as he sits, we meet with his coworker, Kate, who asks him to sign a petition to stop Mrs. Deagle from foreclosing on a local bar called Dory's. Who's Mrs. Deagle? We soon find out as a curmudgeon of an old woman stomps down the street holding the head of a porcelain snowman. She does not stop for traffic and is rude and dismissive of everyone, including a young mother asking for leniency on their debt so they can afford food. Mrs. Deagle simply tells the mother that she now knows what to ask Santa for and enters the bank. Billy is terrified at the sight of her. Mrs. Deagle cuts to the front of the line and accuses Barney of breaking her imported Bavarian snowman. Billy is apologetic and promises to pay for the damages, but Mrs. Deagle doesn't want money. She wants Barney. She wants to kill Barney, either by having him put down at the local kennel or bringing him home and stuffing him inside the dryer and setting it to spin. Barney, who probably senses danger at this point, unties his own leash and leaps over the counter at Mrs. Deagle, smashing the rest of the snowman and sending Mrs. Deagle into a panicked fright. As Barney pulls on Mrs. Deagle's sleeve, Billy pulls him off as the president and vice president of the bank arrive to help out. Mrs. Deagle feigns a weak heart attack, and Billy is almost fired by his bosses. We next see Billy at Dory's Tavern, drawing Mrs. Deagle as a dragon to the approval of others. Gerald, the bank's vice president, enters and demeans Billy's ambitions in life. This is when Kate arrives to take their order. She's volunteering at the bar to help out Dory. Gerald, who doesn't like to be called Jerry, orders a vodka martini, shake, not stirred, which only proves how much of a toolbag he is. He can't even get the James Bond drink order correct when trying to look smooth in front of Kate, who rejects his advances for a date. After drinks, Billy arrives home back that night. His mother is in the kitchen watching It's a Wonderful Life and prepping food for Christmas dinner in a couple of days. The Peltzer home is filled with somewhat half-finished gadgets that Rand has built, and this is where Billy demonstrates how inefficient the automatic egg cracker is. Billy asks his mother what's wrong. She's on the verge of tears. The only partial explanation we get is that Mrs. Deagle called. This time, we get the sense that financial trouble is hitting the Peltzer home as well. But before we can get an explanation, Mr. Peltzer arrives home singing Christmas carols and gives Billy his new present. Billy thinks it's a puppy. As he begins to open it, Rand tells him to dim the lights. He says it's important. Billy unwraps the antique box and opens the lid. This is our first brief look at the mogwai inside as he pops up, startling the Peltzer family. Billy asks, "What is it?" His father tells him, "It's your new pet." We then see the mogwai slowly reach his hands up and pull himself out of the box. Immediately, Barney is intrigued by the new addition to the family, and Billy cradles the mogwai in his arms, and his father tells him that it is a mogwai, but that he has renamed him Gizmo. Mrs. Peltzer picks up her camera to take a picture, and the flash sends Gizmo into a panic, and he jumps back over to Mr. Peltzer for safety, squealing out the words, "Bright light." Mr. Peltzer then explains to them the rules for having a mogwai. Rule number 1, they don't like bright lights, especially sunlight. It will kill them. In reality, this rule helped the filmmakers keep the puppets in the dark to hide the mistakes they made during filming. Rule number 2, keep them away from water. And rule number 3, the most important thing, don't ever, under any circumstances, feed them after midnight, which is a major flaw in this film because it's always after midnight somewhere, but we'll let that one go until the sequel. Billy spends the rest of the night upstairs getting to know Gizmo and forming a bond with his new pet, and he begins to understand the rules a little more, especially the one about bright lights. The next morning, Billy struggles with another Peltzer invention, their homemade juicer. And then Pete enters their house, still dressed as a Christmas tree, to deliver the Peltzer family tree. Meanwhile, Gizmo is upstairs learning to enjoy television as he watches to please a lady with Clark Gable. Billy introduces Pete to Gizmo. They watch as Gizmo sings, but Pete accidentally spills water on him. Gizmo falls over screaming in pain as his back begins to react to the liquid. Soon, 5 balls of fur explode from Gizmo's back, and each grows into a new mogwai, including one with a mohawk. But immediately, we know there's something wrong with this one. He tries to bite Pete, who then becomes disinterested in the creatures. Billy tells his father about the new situation, who thinks that this could be a great opportunity to make money, every kid in America with a mogwai of their own. They also comment that the new mogwais are not like Gizmo. They seem to follow their leader, Stripe, who spits at Gizmo as the rest of them laugh. Later that night, as the whole family sleeps, we hear whimpering. Billy wakes up to find Barney strung up with Christmas lights outside, on the verge of freezing to death. That morning, the Peltzer family tries to figure out what happened and if Mrs. Deagle had anything to do with it. Mr. Peltzer decides to bring Barney to his mother's house for his own safety, but we as the audience already know, this was not the doing of Mrs. Deagle. And as school lets out that afternoon, Billy brings Gizmo to Mr. Hansen, the biology teacher, for a consultation. Billy demonstrates the effects of water on the mogwai. Mr. Hansen is fascinated and asks to keep it temporarily to run some tests. Later that night, Billy meets Kate as she closes up Dory's Tavern, which includes escorting a very drunk Mr. Fetterman outside. Mr. Fetterman is having trouble starting his tractor and drunkenly explains that it is because of gremlins, which neither Billy or Kate have any knowledge of. He tells them about the stories that came out of World War II and then decides to walk home. Billy takes this chance to ask Kate out on a date, and this is when we find out Kate is a very cynical and depressed individual. She explains to Billy about the correlation between holidays and suicide, and how she does not like to celebrate Christmas. Meanwhile, Mr. Hansen is busy drawing blood from the mogwai for testing, which the mogwai doesn't appreciate not one bit. Billy returns home. Gizmo is reading with 3D glasses, the television is playing Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and the other mogwai are desperately trying to get Billy to feed them. Billy looks at the clock, it's not midnight yet, so he gives them all fried chicken, only Gizmo refuses to eat. At the same time, Mr. Hansen is finished up and leaves his mogwai in its cage, but he also leaves a half-eaten sandwich within its reach. The next morning, Billy and Gizmo wake up to a shocking sight. Instead of 6 mogwai, only Gizmo remains, as the other 5 are now replaced with slimy green cocoons. Billy tells his mother that he followed the rules, then he checks the clock and sees that it still says 11:35 p.m. Someone has chewed through the cord, stopping the clock. And the same thing has happened at the school. Mr. Hansen's mogwai is now replaced with a similar cocoon within its cage. He explains to Pete and Billy that, like a caterpillar, this creature is going through some changes. Because of everything that's going on, Mrs. Peltzer is now left home alone, and she is making delicious gingerbread cookies. The phone rings, and it's her husband checking in. He's away at a conference of inventors. Notice the replica time machine in the right-hand background. We then cut to the cocoon upstairs. They begin to stir, and as we cut back to Rand at the conference, notice that the time machine is gone, and the onlookers are wondering where it went. I guess the thing worked. Where's Billy at this time? Well, he's at work dealing with Mrs. Deagle, who again threatens Barney with death. Meanwhile, Mr. Hansen is showing an educational film to his students as his cocoon begins to stir and then breaks open, as well as the rest of them in Billy's bedroom. We see a frightened Gizmo looking on. Mr. Hansen dismisses his class and goes to look for his mogwai, or at least what was his mogwai. He calls Billy, tells him what happened, and Billy rushes over to the school. However, before he can get there, Mr. Hansen tries to entice whatever hatched out from under a desk using a candy bar. The creature eats the candy bar, but it also attacks Mr. Hansen. When Billy arrives, he finds Mr. Hansen dead under the desk, a needle jabbed into his ass, revenge for the blood test. In the original script, Mr. Hansen was supposed to be found with a dozen hypodermic needles stuck through his face, but concerns over an R rating changed his scene very dramatically. Billy goes to call for help, but as he reaches for the phone, a green claw slices through his hand. Billy watches as the claw grabs an apple, takes a bite, and then throws it back at him. Obviously, these creatures do not like health food. After eating a glass test tube, the creature rips through the ventilation grate. Billy heads to the nurse's station to get a bandage, but before he can treat his wound, the new creature pops out of a cabinet, sending Billy backwards. It then crashes through another vent and disappears. As for the other 5 at the Peltzer home, they are making a lot of noise, as well as using Gizmo for target practice, as he is now stuck to a dartboard. However, this is short-lived, as Gizmo is then thrown into the laundry chute. Mrs. Peltzer is concerned about what she's hearing and investigates with a kitchen knife in hand. As she discovers the broken cocoons, the phone rings. It's Billy frantically trying to warn her. This is cut short as another Green Claw rips away the phone line from the Peltzer home. The line goes dead. At that moment, the Peltzer home is filled with the sounds of "Do You Hear What I Hear?" The recently hatched gremlins have made their way downstairs and made themselves comfortable. Mrs. Peltzer goes down, turns off the music, and makes her way to the kitchen. The first thing she sees is one of the new creatures, reptile in appearance, sitting and eating all of her Christmas cookies. The creature leans into the blender to lick the remaining batter, and Mrs. Peltzer takes that chance to reach out and turn it on. That gremlin is now eviscerated. Next, Mrs. Peltzer is peppered with flying dinner plates. She shields herself with a dinner tray before stabbing the gremlin in the chest, but as she steps back, she is hit again from behind with a cookie tray. A third gremlin is perched in front of the microwave. She uses a can of cooking spray to force it back into the open oven, slams the door shut, and turns it on. This gremlin explodes as the heat and pressure cook him from the inside out. And as she hears more noise coming from the living room, she grabs 2 more knives and she makes her way there. She notices movement in one of the stockings hung on the fireplace. However, this is a diversion. The 4th gremlin is hiding in the tree and attacks her from behind, and it tries to strangle her to death. Billy arrives just in time to grab a decorative sword from the wall and decapitate the gremlin, sending its head into the roaring fire. However, their problems are just beginning. The leader, Stripe, appears and then escapes by crashing through their window. Billy brings his mother to the safety of a neighbor's house, re-enters his own home to find Gizmo, and then tracks Stripe through the snow to the YMCA. As Billy hunts for Stripe, the alarm goes off. As he moves to open the electrical panel to turn it off, Stripe pops out, knocks him down, and viciously claws at his chest. Stripe then runs off to the swimming pool and jumps in. Immediately, Billy knows this is a catastrophic turn of events. If one drop of water can make one new gremlin, what will a swimming pool create? Billy and Gizmo run and head to the sheriff's office to warn them. The 2 on duty are half in the bag, and even though they're introduced to Gizmo, they still do not believe Billy's story. But it may be too late anyways, as Stripe leads hundreds of newly born gremlins down Main Street. First stop, Mr. Futterman's home. The television starts to act up. Mr. Futterman goes outside to check on the antenna when he hears noise coming from his own garage. The gremlins have started his tractor and his plow, and they are headed directly for him. He runs into his home, but the gremlins just crash right through the walls and run down the Futtermans. And even though they reappear in the sequel, in the book, the Futtermans meet an awful and grisly demise. Next up, let's screw with the U.S. Postal Service. Why not? As one of Kingston Falls residents mails a last-minute letter, his hand is grabbed from inside. Even the witnessing priest backs away from this one. Up next, fun with traffic lights. One of the gremlins decides to rewire the signals so they all turn green, causing a multiple car accident at the main intersection. By now, the chaos has started to be reported to the police. The sheriff learns of the accident at the Futtermans, and the 2 leave to investigate, still not believing in Billy's story. However, the gremlins are just getting started. A group have arrived at Mrs. Deagle's home as she spends her time feeding her cats, and yes, her cats are all named after money: dollar bill, kopeck, peso. You get the idea. Just then, she hears something that she absolutely hates: Christmas carolers singing at her front door. She grabs a pitcher of water to throw at them, but as she opens the door, she is greeted by the gremlins singing in their own way. And at this point in the film, I think we've all learned to love these little maniacs. But the Christmas carolers were just a diversion. One of them is already inside and screwing with Mrs. Deagle's motorized chair. Now the sight of the gremlins frightens Mrs. Deagle, and she runs back inside, sits on her chair, pushes the button, and she was right to be frightened. The chair takes off at a dangerous rate of speed and eventually launches Mrs. Deagle out of the 3rd floor window to her death, where she's discovered by our law enforcement duo. As they try to come to terms with what they just witnessed, Dave Marsh, who does Santa every year in Kingston Falls, comes crashing through a fence towards the squad car. He is screaming for help, and he has stuff all over him. We soon see that Dave Marsh is covered in gremlins. The police refuse to get out of their car or roll down their windows. They instead leave Dave to his own fate. Meanwhile, Pete is fending off gremlins with a slingshot and a pair of scissors as he defends his own home. Back to our 2 officers, who are still panicked and crash their vehicle, resulting in a fiery explosion that Stripe enjoys very, very much. During all this time, Billy has been able to start his car, but as they listen to Rockin' Ricky Rialto on the radio, they hear the gremlins gremlins break into his studio and attack him too. Meanwhile, at Dory's Tavern, most of the gremlins have decided to go out drinking. The bar is in total chaos as Kate tries to serve drinks and not get hurt in the process. There is excessive drinking, smoking, one gremlin in a trench coat exposing himself to Kate, Star Wars arcade games, poker games, puppet work, breakdancing, gunplay, and basically overall drunken disorderly destruction. That is until Kate tries to light one of their cigarettes and realizes they don't like bright lights. And this is when she grabs a camera and starts using the flash to battle back. That is until she is targeted with a gun. However, she's saved as the bar is soon illuminated by the headlights of Billy's VW Bug, giving Kate a chance to escape. But Billy's car then dies on them and they have to make a run for it. The town is now overrun. People and gremlins are running in every direction. Billy, Kate, and Gizmo make their way to the bank. It too is also destroyed from the inside out, and here we get the infamous Kate speech about why she doesn't like Christmas. It turns out that when Kate was a little girl, her father never came home on Christmas Eve. In fact, he never came home at all. There was a search for him, but nothing ever turned up. Then, about 10 days later, there was a smell coming from the chimney. The fire department showed up to investigate. That is when they found Kate's father dead. He was going to come down the chimney like Santa. He fell, broke his neck, and died. And that is why Kate hates Christmas. After that dark, troubling childhood memory, and let's face it, Kate needs therapy, Billy, Gizmo, and Kate walk outside. It is quiet because the sun will soon be up. The gremlins must have gone somewhere safe. The answer to that? The movie theater. To see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which apparently they frickin' love because they all begin to sing along to the film. Billy and Kate have a new plan at this point: sneak backstage, enter the basement, and turn on the gas. That way they can light the entire theater on fire and kill all the gremlins at the same time. Except one gremlin, Stripe, is not in his seat. He wants some candy and he leaves the theater. Billy and Kate do manage to turn on the gas, but just like in real life, the explosion that occurs is bigger than they thought it would be. In reality, the explosion shattered windows at Warner Brothers' backlot that were about a mile away. However, it works. Billy and Kate successfully barbecue the gremlin horde, except for the one very important gremlin, Stripe, the leader, who's now pissed off as he witnesses the death of his entire gremlin family. Billy, Kate, and Gizmo break into a department store to hunt him down. Kate goes looking for the electrical panel to turn on the lights. Billy goes into the various departments to look for Stripe. Apparently, Stripe is good with electronics, as he's able to taunt Billy over all of the display TVs at once. He then hides in the toy department after turning on a bunch of diversions. Kate has found the control room for the store at this moment and is turning things on blindly. This includes a water fountain in the garden area. Not wanting to be left out, Gizmo decides not to stick around with Kate and makes his way into the store. Billy continues to pursue Stripe. He's met with flying circular saws being thrown at his head, along with full paint cans. The chase continues into the sporting goods department, where Billy is injured in the back with an automatic baseball pitcher, a crossbow to the arm, and finally, Stripe comes at him with a chainsaw. While this occurs, Gizmo sees that the sun has come up and gets himself a vehicle, a Barbie Corvette, and he races towards his owner. Luckily for Billy, Kate finds the light switches for the sporting goods department, and the bright lights send Stripe backwards. Unfortunately, Stripe is sent into the home garden department, where the fountain is still active. Outside, Rand and Barney stop in the middle of all the destruction. Barney jumps out of the vehicle and into the department store. He must sense Billy is in danger. On the car radio, you can hear Rock and Ricky telling his listeners that he's okay and that the Marines have shown up and are ready with fire hoses to beat back the creatures. Not a great plan. Gizmo meets up with Barney. Billy stumbles into the garden area and is immediately fired upon by Stripe, who now has a loaded gun. Billy hides as Stripe dips his finger into the bubbling water, starting the multiplication process all over again. But this time, Gizmo is not afraid. Our hero jumps his Corvette into the air and crashes against the wall next to the pull strings for the window blinds. As Stripe calls Gizmo Caca, he fires at him. Gizmo grips the pull string and is vaulted up as he exposes the room to sunlight. Stripe is caught in the sunbeam and he begins to melt away. His carcass falls into the water and then leaps out for one final scare. Even his bones turn into a greenish puddle of goo. Billy, Rand, Kate, Gizmo, and Barney exit the store. The ordeal is finally over. Later that night, the group reunites at home and watches the news labels the Kingston Falls incident as mass hysteria gone wrong. And as Mrs. Peltzer turns around, the old Chinese man is standing in their home and he's furious that they allowed this massacre to occur. He tells them that they are not ready and takes Gizmo back, only giving Billy some credit as worthy of owning a mogwai. Gizmo asks to say goodbye, the old man leaves, and the credits roll. With the movie becoming such a box office smash hit, it was inevitable that a sequel would be made. However, it never captured the magic of the first. Although the director of both films prefers the second over the original. The second only made $41 million when it was released 6 years later in 1990. A case of being too little, too late, or just a sequel not being as good as the original? You decide. I hope you enjoyed this look back at one of Generation X's most cherished and dark holiday classics. If you want more retro movie reviews, click on the thumbnail at the end of the video for our playlist. Next week, we'll revisit another holiday classic from the 1990s, Jingle All the Way, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. I hope you'll join us for that. I thank you for watching. As always, I'm still your reluctant gringo from somewhere south of the border. Salud, a huevo, and Feliz Navidad.